Today I will be answering what Cosmic Skeptic believes is Christianity's biggest problem: animal suffering. Let's hear what he has to say.
I'm not just here to restate the problem of evil as if it's anything new. There's something else. There exists such an obvious and overwhelming version of the problem of evil that it bemuses me that so many philosophers leave it entirely out of the discussion, or at best relegate it to a passing paragraph or a footnote or something. I'm talking, of course, about the problem of animal suffering. Although in this video I'm going to respond to William Lane Craig, a Christian, on the subject, do bear in mind that these arguments should apply to any God who claims to be morally perfect.
This claim that God is morally perfect may seem clear at first, but it assumes we agree on what morality is. There are many views on what morality is. Obviously, from natural law to utilitarianism, there are various diverse views. Now, you might say that most people will agree that causing unnecessary suffering in animals is wrong, regardless of the moral system that you choose. I can agree with this, but only given one additional distinction. Most people will agree it is morally wrong for humans to cause unnecessary suffering in animals. Generally, I think the way we feel regarding morality is due to the way that we were raised in our culture, and that culture focuses on human morality. When your parents explain to you what's right and wrong, they're not explaining to you what's right and wrong for a moose, or for God even. So the way we feel about what's right and wrong is primarily applicable to human morality. I think what Cosmic Skeptic is doing is applying that moral feeling about human morality to God. But how do we know that's valid? How do we know that what is moral for us is also moral for God? In the natural law theory of morality, what we ought to will depends on our nature. A mother and a father, for example, ought to care for their children because it's part of their nature to do so. The same wouldn't apply to somebody who isn't the mother of that or father of that child. The wrongness of causing unnecessary animal suffering, likewise, if the natural law theory of morality is correct, would be wrong due to our nature as human beings. Considering that God has a different nature than human beings, why exactly should we assume that God would have the same moral obligations as we do? I don't think you can just look at our moral feelings and assume that they apply to God. How would we determine what is moral for God then? Well, what we would do is, if we follow the natural law theory of morality, is see what God's nature is, because what's good for God is due to his nature. In other words, what's good for God is that which he has a natural tendency towards, what fulfills his natural tendency. What is that? It can only be God himself. If an end other than himself made God good, then something other than God would be the cause of his goodness and his perfection. But God is the first cause, so only God himself can be the cause of his goodness and his perfection. So what does this mean? It means all God ought to will is himself. God can will whatever suffering he wishes to exist, and by the natural law theory of morality, as long as he wills himself as the end, God will be morally perfect. What is God? According to St. Thomas Aquinas, God is pure act, also known as existence itself. So God can will whatever he wants, so long as he wills existence or actuality while he is willing that thing. When God wills the lion who eats the zebra, He is willing something that exists, something that is actual. So God is acting morally according to what makes himself a good God. Now hold on, you might say, God is also supposed to be all loving. How is it all loving to allow a zebra to suffer in this way? Well, again, you need to think rationally about this. It's not enough to just rely on your emotions to determine what loving is. What is love? According to St. Thomas Aquinas, love is to will the good of another. Doesn't seem too controversial. Is God willing the good of another when he wills the zebra to suffer? Well, the answer is that God doesn't really will that the zebra suffers. What God wills is the good of the lion, and the lion causes the zebra to suffer. God allows the zebra to suffer, but it is because he wills the good of the lion. Creatures have real causal powers. So God is all-loving still, in this case, because all that God is willing is the good of the lion. He isn't willing the death of the zebra. The death of the zebra is the result of the will of the lion. Now, hold on, you might say. Isn't God failing to love the zebra by allowing the zebra to suffer? Nope. In fact, God is still willing the zebra to exist at every moment that the zebra exists. It's just that there are two conflicting goods. One is the good of the lion, and the other one's the good of the zebra. So God continues to will the good of both creatures, allows that conflict to play out, and due to the causal powers of the lion, the zebra suffers. Now, what Cosmic Skeptic says next about the zebra and the lion is as follows.
But there are just a multitude of problems with this, right? First, it's of course true that in practice, any functional ecosystem we know of requires predators and prey in order to be balanced. But why does this need to be true in principle? Right? The laws of ecosystems, as they stand, require predation, but are we expected to believe that God couldn't have made these laws differently? Is God constrained by these laws? That's the implication of saying that an ecosystem must be balanced in this way, that God couldn't have created a balanced ecosystem using other, less painful methods. In other words, the laws of ecosystems somehow constrain what God is able to do. Are we really to think that the laws of ecosystems are more fundamental than God is? No, God is the creator of the laws of ecosystems, and so can't be bound by them.
The answer is, yeah, God could create a world without suffering at all, but why does he have to? I've shown that on a natural law view of morality, suffering does not conflict with God's goodness, nor does it conflict with God's omnibenevolence. So why does God have to create the best possible world, as it were? He doesn't. Now, you might ask, why wouldn't he? And the answer there is that there is no sufficient answer. There can't be, because God has free will. So he can create whatever he wants, as long as it's consistent with his nature. Also, anything God creates must be less perfect and less good than himself, since God is the most good and most perfect. So if God creates anything, it cannot be the most perfect world, since the most perfect world would just be him by himself. But God chooses to love others, and by doing so he creates creatures that are less good than he is, out of necessity. The degree of goodness that God chooses to exist is somewhat arbitrary, although not completely, since he still has to will himself as the end. And in doing so, he chooses some goods that conflict with other goods, and which are corruptible. He didn't choose those goods because he wanted corruption and conflict, but because he wanted the goods that came from the conflict and corruption. If you focus on the lion for a second, the hunting abilities of a lion are incredible. They are very good. It may not be good for the zebra, but it's still good for the lion nonetheless. And without the death of the zebra, that good would never really be fully realized. Hence, God chose to will that good and allow the death of the zebra. You might argue that the hunting skills of the lion are not good enough to outweigh the badness of the suffering of the zebra, but God doesn't have to ensure that the universe is more good than bad. All God has to do is will the goodness of creatures. You may not like that, it may not make you feel good, but so what? I mean, if you're trying to pose a problem for Christianity, it's not just enough to say that Christianity doesn't make you feel good. Christianity can still be true and not make you feel good. I mean, if you're an atheist, you believe the same suffering exists. And I'm sure it doesn't make you feel good either. But no more does that disprove naturalism or atheism than it disproves Christianity. So ultimately, I think Christianity's biggest problem isn't actually a problem once you fully realize and analyze the nature of God and of the good. Thanks for watching.